Last night, reports broke that President Biden is expected to ask Congress for a defense budget of more than $770 billion in 2023. The budget proposal is a $17 billion increase from Biden's request last year. Biden's former request of $753 billion was already $12 billion more than former President Donald Trump's highest military budget. So if we're doing the math right, Biden's 23 request would be nearly $30 billion more than Trump's.
The Peter G. Peterson Foundation put the massive spending in perspective and confirmed that the U.S. spends more on defense than China, India, Russia, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, Italy, and Australia combined. Our rising panelist, council member at large of Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and partner at CGCN Group, Sam Gadoldig, join us to discuss. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Will, we're just going to spend more and more on defense, I guess, every year, regardless of the conditions on the ground, regardless of the fact that I thought we were trying to end these involvements, these wars we've been in. But the health of the bureaucracy, I guess, is just too important.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate expansion of the military-industrial complex. You would think when we're ending an engagement in Afghanistan, a 20-year-plus war, we're pulling back, that you would see a Defense Department that is trying to work smarter. I think that you have really smart defense professionals, Admiral Mullen, other people who have said if we don't get our spending and budget, and particularly the budget of the Defense Department under control, that's going to be a national security concern. Overhead and the like, contractors, outsourcing of services, how far our footprint is. And what really makes it hard to swallow for someone like me who's dealing every day and has to balance a budget and is trying to provide for residents, there's just this cognitive dissonance between this expanded, bloated budget approaching $1 trillion if it keeps on the same pace over the next several years, and 10-11% of our spending. And we have people that don't have health care, that can't afford child care that costs $2,000 a month. We've got a mismatch of priorities, unfortunately.
And Sam, earlier this week we had Lucas Kuntz, a Senate candidate, on the show, and he was making the point that a significant chunk of this military spending goes to, say, keep open the Strait of Hormuz, which then allows oil to flow through it, 70+% of which flows over to Asia. And in general, the military spending is to prop up the petrodollar and the global fossil fuel economy. Yet here American consumers are paying outrageous prices at the pump. So what are we getting for our $770 billion here?
You keep asking me these very technical questions, and I'm like this broad picture guy. The thing that I think is ironic about a Biden defense budget that's $30 billion more than Trump's ever was is the fact that if Trump did it, you'd have not you, but the media's hair would be on fire. And I think Trump's greatest accomplishment is that he didn't start any new engagements overseas. In fact, he did everything he could to wind the ones that the previous presidents, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, started. There's a lot of cynicism out there, especially among younger Republicans and some, kind of base Democrats about this spending and these engagements. I think for different reasons. Republicans would rather spend the money at home, maybe at our own border to protect it, rather than go to Ukraine to protect a border that, no one in America will ever likely see. So I just find the whole conversation amusing. If Trump or any Republican suggested doing this, the left would be going bats, the end of the word. So here we are. A Democratic president is doing it. The establishment seems to be getting behind it. There's a lot of cynicism that it's a mini stimulus bill and a way to kind of juice the economy and maybe get our defense contractors producing all kinds of, new products to sell to Ukraine or wherever it might go. And I don't disagree with Will personally. I think there's a lot of Republicans that agree with Will that the money should be spent in America. I think the difference in Congress would be, where the liberals would like to spend it and where the Republicans would like to spend it. But I do think it's a generational thing. These older Republicans and older Democrats, are very comfortable beginning these new engagements. And I think the younger crowd in both parties, especially in Congress, is a little more cynical about, this spending and the lack of discussion that goes around it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical of spending on all fronts, in all categories, not depending on who's the president. But that goes to an issue. The Republicans cannot criticize out of control government spending because every time they're in charge, they're responsible for they go more over the top than the previous administration. Then of course Democrats top them because Democrats have even less of an ideological commitment to keeping spending in line. But Republicans have a stated opposition to it. But it like nobody believes them, or you'd be a fool if you did believe them when they rail against Democrats spending too much, because we all know they're going to spend too much. Like they've done it every single time, right?
That is a bipartisan problem in the mainstream of both political parties. I think you'll have some people, like Senator Sanders and maybe Elizabeth Warren and other people who do push back against this budget in significant ways. But I think you're right. Republicans, whether it be unpaid for tax cuts, go down the list, defense spending, other types of spending. You remember Trump spending was still the largest ever when Trump did it for the Defense Department. So I think you see a pattern there. You have to remember, too, this is half of the discretionary budget. A lot of our budget is fixed. I deal with a $6 billion budget. Most of it is spoken for by the time I get to it as far as, dedicated spending. And this is spending half of our discretionary budget. There's choices, there's trade-offs there. And I think when you look at that graphic you showed, as much as 11 other countries, we are in an existential decision here, point of what will America be in the next century, and where will our place in the world be, and how will we get there? And I think you still have this generation, I agree with my colleague, challenge of we have to spend as much as possible so we can remain, the most dominant entity. Maybe what we need to do is figure out how we can become strong here at home and work with others in collaboration. And it's not just a military approach, and work smarter. I'm for investments in cybersecurity, but that's not where most of this money is going. So I think it's just a change of what the priorities are and what they should be.
Yeah, and Sam, the pattern has been, as you've watched it unfold, time and time again, is the president proposes a certain amount of money for the military, which is more than was spent the year before, and then Congress takes it and says thank you, and then adds even more to it from there. And that's so far that's been either party. If Republicans end up taking the House next term, do you suspect that they could finally break that pattern, or do you think that there are still enough old guard members that we'll see it again, that Biden will propose by then $805 billion and Republicans will come back with, how about 815?
I think the Congress right now is very, very interesting, and to compare this Congress and the incoming Congress in the next session to the years past is not applicable, right? I think we could have 80 to 90 brand new Republican members, all very green, not vested in programs of the past. I mean, if we pick up 50 or so seats and replace 30 retiring members, you're at 80 brand new members in the Republican conference alone. So I just think that there's a sense among these younger members that we should not be spending this kind of money to fight these wars overseas. I think Trump started that kind of idea that we not be getting in these engagements and start winding them down. And I think there's a lot of younger Republicans that feel strongly about it. I think it will split the Republican conference right down the middle. I don't think it's an easy kind of leadership vote for a McCarthy and a Scalise and whoever is the conference chair. So I just think it's going to be a very complicated debate going forward with Republicans. I don't think they're all there. And you've seen Barbara Lee and others speak out against the Iraq war. I think liberals are kind of coming around to her position as well. So, who the Democratic leader is and whether they can get enough votes to make up the Republicans that lack it to get Biden the funds he's requesting. I think next Congress is going to be super interesting when it comes to getting votes for, these engagements.
Yeah, and Will, it's not like this kind of spending, this specific type of spending is particularly popular among activist young people, Democrats, liberals, progressives, et cetera, or the base is also not interventionist, the Democratic base. So you'd think this is like the worst thing to prioritize for Democrats, just like on all fronts.
Well, you're exactly right, and I think it really shows that this is an industrial complex. I mean, like, Eisenhower was right. This thing has so much inertia that it doesn't really matter what public opinion is or where the mainstream of both parties are or the activists of both parties are. It just kind of builds on itself. And if you look at the commentary on it just in the last day or so, it's kind of like, oh, here we go again. It's almost a defeatist commentary, like that, from people who don't want to see it happen, but they don't think that anything can change. And I think that shows how deep and how powerful and how interconnected this is throughout the bureaucracy. A lot of this money goes to the Department of Energy for nuclear, it goes a lot of places. And so people sometimes just throw up their hands, but we have to tackle this because this is unsustainable going forward.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we're buying an entire new fleet of nuclear weapons because that's what we need, more nuclear weapons.
Why not?
Anyways, Sam, Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The grown-ups are back in charge, Ryan.
There you go. Okay, nix that nuclear modernization program when you guys get in power. Appreciate that. We'll have more Rising right after this.